If you've been listening, we've offered an extended, sometimes meandering argument that the United States is a haunted house. We are haunted by the revenants of slavery and Jim Crow. We are haunted by the cultural and economic policies of the Reagan years, and we are haunted by a mode of conquest that informs so much of our toxic masculine heroes. We've also asked if the haunted house is somehow unique to the United States. With our crumbling middle class, bloated mortgages, and Pinterest aesthetics, we are often trapped inside the very thing that is supposed to keep us safe. In hopes of both challenging and highlighting those arguments, we are making one final, if unplanned, stop on our haunted house tour. And this time, we are headed across the Pacific Ocean to Japan. On this episode of Horror Joy, we are jumping headlong into the complicated, candy-coated frames of Nobuhiko Obayashi's 1977 cult classic Hausu and Junji Ito's disturbingly erotic Wooden Spirit, found in his Fragments of Horror anthology. Both texts offer strange encounters with haunted and haunting houses, and both texts offer a confrontation with complex histories, gendered stereotypes, and traditions.
In Hausu, we follow 7 young women on the verge of adulthood. Is the exaggerated style corny or thought-provoking? Balancing the oral similarity between kawaii, which means cute, and kawaii, which means scary, we are forced to engage with the transitions out of childhood, transitions out of war, and the disruption of Japanese society through a pop art sheen. In Wooden Spirit, Junji Ito offers us a horrifying encounter with the fetishization of material culture when an unusual woman shows up to a newly minted cultural site with seduction on her mind. But is it the seduction of the male caretaker? Or something stranger? So grab your 6 favorite friends and let's head out to the country. It's time to visit that long estranged auntie. But stay away from the piano, ban the linen closet, ban the clock. And if the cat can open and close the doors, it might be time to walk. No, run away. We're your hosts. I'm Brian Onishi.
And I'm Jeff Stoynoff. We're 2 professors seeking the emotional and intellectual joys of horror. All right, Yins, we're back with an unplanned stop on our haunted house tour. This time, we have headed across the Pacific Ocean to Japan unexpectedly, which, I mean, it's quite an unexpected, or maybe a strange, no, dare I say, weird encounter to not expect to end up in Japan, because that's quite a long flight, as anyone who has done it would know, especially from here in the confines of good old central Pennsyltucky. I mean, Brian, you suggested this. I have never seen Hausu. It's on HBO Max right now, listeners. So if you have a subscription or whatever the heck they're calling their streaming service, it is anglicized. It's translated into house, but it's 1977, and you'll know immediately as soon as you press play whether you have the right thing or not. Where this is, I don't know, I'm getting like big Sailor Moon vibes from this, or maybe this is getting big vibes from House. And then we also have one of the shorter pieces of manga from Junji Ito's Fragments of Horror, Wooden Spirit, which is equally weird, if in very different ways. Haunted houses, we've discussed them as maybe a particularly American problem or a particularly United States type thing. And I think some of the authors we've interviewed and who you all listeners hopefully have tuned in for, the Meet Your Maker episodes, a lot have actually been from the UK. So maybe Jeff's theory of the haunted house being an American thing has some holes in it, but maybe the specifically American characteristics of a haunted house are related to the cultural and political history, at least in the last 40 years. So that's something maybe we'll come back to in another time. But now we're in Japan, that does not have the same necessarily baggage that we do in the United States. Now, granted, it's of course 1977 when House is released, which is about 30 years after we dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I don't know a lot about Japanese culture. I might defer to you, Brian, for that. But if you like, have a little more insight into that. But as an American, reading and experiencing Japanese material culture after World War II, my take has always been that we really fucked up people with those atomic bombs, and then we essentially neutered, for lack of a better term, the country. There was a defense force, but never an army. The West really stuck it to Japan, Interestingly, it may be more so than Germany, even in some ways, post World War II. Maybe that's an American thing because Pearl Harbor really made white American men angry when you bomb the entire harbor and stuff like that. So we have the long history of internment camps and everything. But in Japan, culture just kind of gets weird, and I love it. Like it's so strange. I remember growing up in the 90s and early aughts watching anime, whether on Adult Swim or just Cartoon Network late at night, and I didn't understand what the hell was going on. And listeners, after watching Hausu, I believe we may have found some of the trajectory of how we ended up from Hausu to Sailor Moon to even Pokemon to some of like the stuff that doesn't really make sense necessarily to our Western minds until we're watching these media. Haunted houses here are maybe more of, Brian, we've discussed haunting rather than a haunted house, a haunting house. And that's, I think, what we're seeing in Hausu. I think that's definitely what we're seeing in Wooden Spirit with Junji Ito. What I like the similarity here with this comparison of these two texts is that we have a spirit who seems to animate both houses that it takes women to bring out. In Hausu, it's the unmarried seven, the friend group who are, schoolgirls who go to visit Gorgeous's long lost auntie because Gorgeous's mom died when she was young, and Gorgeous's dad is now going to marry this other woman who is like the archetype of Beyonce. There's always some fan going with her scarf just blowing in the wind. It's amazing. I love it. The entire all of it. It's just great. The music is wild anyway. But she's rebelling. She's doing this rebellious teenage thing, and they're gonna go to this house. It's like Scooby-Doo in some ways, like the hijinks that break out. It's just great. I think even we could argue that some of these girls are Scooby-Doo types or archetypes. I don't know. Brian, you tell me if I'm nuts. Wooden Spirit, much shorter. You covered kind of the Spark Notes version of it in the opening there, but this woman shows up to be the caretaker for this home, to be a cleaner, like essentially. And the daughter and father, the daughter who's our narrator, Megumi, she finds this woman making sweet love to the floorboards of this house. And then the house itself begins to become animate. And I don't know if there's a chicken or an egg thing here, Brian, or what, but we have these two things where we see a very distinctly Japanese interpretation of what the haunted house looks like. It's also maybe worth noting that the house, in some ways, like the haunted house, is a Western thing that's been imposed, and so we're seeing like almost like a translation, or I don't know, like a specifically Japanese take on that, like sort of Western idea of a house, and then like sort of what that looks like in some ways too. So I'll just sort of throw that out there too. Brian, what are we doing here, man? Like, what are these haunted houses? What are these haunting houses? Why we decided to get on this plane and travel 22 hours?
All right, couple things I want to say. I just put one of my kids on an airplane to Japan. They're currently there now having an incredible time. They're their educational tour. I am heading out there at the end of June as well. Japan is on my mind. I, as a lot of you know who have listened, have Japanese heritage. My father is Japanese American. I'm biracial, Japanese American. I've got some thoughts about that, and I've got a project cooking. So if you're interested in the relationship of mixed race, biraciality, any of that stuff, and horror, something is on its way, hopefully sometime soon. But there's a couple of things that are going on here, and I want to, like, there's so much. Okay, like maybe I'll just list them and we can get to them at some point, right? But like, okay, the names of the girls, I think we have to kind of maybe start there. Like you said, they're like these Scooby Doo archetypes, but their names tell you exactly who they are. So we have seven friends. Gorgeous and Fantasy are seemingly best friends, and they have a relationship. There may be a queer reading here. I've got an article called "Breaking the Mirror: Hausu and Bad Love Objects" by Aaron Nunoda, and they talk a lot about this kind of queer relationship between the girls, especially as they go to adulthood. We can talk about that. So their names, let's go through them. Gorgeous and Fantasy. Gorgeous is just very pretty and like dresses really well. She's rich. She's like the kind of most well put together. Fantasy is a little bit less grounded. She is the one that is able to see all the stuff going on, and nobody believes her because they think that she's always kind of living in this fantastic world. Prof She's the bespectacled, kind of nerdy, smart one. There you go, Jeff, putting on the spectacles. Hello, prof. We've got Mac. They call her Mac. It's just short for stomach, like because she's supposed to be the fat one. But folks, listen, I don't know what's going on with body image in Japan in 1977 or even now. This young girl is not fat in any way, shape, or form. So they call her stomach. She's always eating. You know, it made me think of somebody like Dustin from Stranger Things, but you always have this one kid who's always doing the eating, and that drives part of the narrative. We'll get, Mac does that. Melody plays all the music. There's an incredible scene here in Hausu if you've seen it. It's incredible. Melody's scene, I think, is one of the most amazing things in the movie. And then Kung Fu, who I think may be my favorite character. What's her personality? What does she do in the movie? Yeah, she just does Kung Fu. She just kicks stuff. And again, her scene at the end is also incredible. Everything about this is amazing. Okay, so I'm going to throw it back to you with a couple questions. I wanted to just say Wood and Spirit by Junji Ito. So part of the setup, right, is that this house has just newly kind of been minted as a cultural heritage site. It's a wooden house, right? It's an old house. And there's some, I think, easy jokes about wood and seduction. Maybe we'll leave out. Jeff, from the very beginning, you've talked about woods is close to madness, etymologically in English. I'm not sure how that would work out in Japanese. But there's also a kind of wonder about whether or not this is a kind of eco-horror. So if we imagine, no matter how old our traditions are, no matter how old our culture is, no matter how old our cultural heritage sites are, the wood that made the house is older. The earth is older. And there's a seduction, right, by the earth for some people. So we're pulling back the sheen where the house is supposed to be the safety mechanism or object of safety for everybody, and in fact becomes its own thing, right? It was ripped out of its home to become somebody else's home, and maybe this is a kind of very short eco-horror. But yeah, there's a lot of strange eroticism. Again, maybe we can talk about a queer reading here. There's lots that I want to say about the relationship between cuteness and scariness here. So I'm just going to kind of set this up and throw it to you because I'll say this. So kawaii is that cute aesthetic. You see Japanese cuteness? That's the kawaii stuff. The little drawings that people do. We have books, in our house, how to draw kawaii, right? And it's so cute. Everything is just uber cuteness. The idea that kawaii, or I don't know Japanese, right? So folks, email us, horrorjoypod@gmail.com for your feedback on what we're doing here. But the article that I mentioned talks about this relationship between the way that it sounds like cuteness and scariness sound the same in Japanese. If you haven't seen this movie, it is like watching a perfume / cologne commercial in 1977 Japan. But it's not about cologne or perfume. It's about an auntie who invites these young women to her house, and they go and visit, and it turns out to be haunted. It's full of a bewitched or even bewitching cat named Blanche. That's awesome. One thing that I thought about throughout this whole movie is that it never ever lets you forget that you're watching a movie. It never ever tries to trick you into thinking that this is real, right? So we can talk about formalism versus realism in film, etc., but this is not in any way trying to capture the really real. It's trying to use the art of cinema to do something else. Now, it looks campy and corny, and it turns out that the narrative is like pretty weird and funny, but honestly, I loved it. And I'm going to shout out Brianna N. Cox. She mentioned this movie as well, and I think that's where it initially got in my head. So, Brianna, thank you for the recommendation. I will say that I absolutely love this movie. So, Jeff, I want to throw it to you. I want to ask you a question about your initial take on the style of the movie. It is heavily stylized. It feels like we're watching a commercial the whole time. There's this music going on. There's a relationship between the girls and their teacher. We get cuts to the teacher, Mr. Togo, is that his name? Throughout, and he's on a journey. So anyway, let's start with the style. If you're willing, if you want to go somewhere else, let's go. But what did you think watching this for the first time? The style is very deliberate and wacky in many ways. What did you think?
This movie does not work if it is not shot in the style that it's shot in. You need the comic elements of this movie to carry the horror elements. This is something we've talked about maybe a few times in the podcast. How horror, or some of our creators we've had on will talk about this. How horror and comedy are they kind of dovetail. Like there are some cases. I mean, I don't know. You and I have watched horror movies together. I tend to laugh at stuff that is really horrific because I don't know how else to respond. Like it's just I'm not necessarily saying that it's funny, but it's something like where your body needs to have a cathartic release, and sometimes that's laughter. That's kind of the premise of the podcast, Ian's, if you haven't been paying attention, like a horror and joy in a sense is laughter, is comedy, is enjoyment. So this movie is maybe peak horror joy for us. Like it is bringing together the two things that we have been arguing are so closely related for now about nearly 2 years, really. It's so weird. I'm like it's so experimental in the best ways. Like there are all sorts of things being done with the way that it's shot, as you're saying. There are these close-ups. The auntie, once we get into her house, there are so many shots where the girls are off doing something and she's looking right in the camera. So it's breaking that fourth wall so that like it's so self-aware that it's a movie. You're absolutely right. There is no point in time when this movie is trying to make it seem like it is real. It is the antithesis to Blair Witch Project. Like, this is not a found footage film. This is very much a movie. This is very much a performance that is meant to be scaring us while also like hysterical because the practical effects are so bad at times. But yet also like there's this really cool I don't know how they do it, but I'm reminded of the really weird shadow motion animation versions of the Lord of the Rings, the movies they made back in the 70s. Like there's some film stuff going on here in this movie house that they must be superimposing one frame over another to get the effect that they're doing. Like I have no idea how it would be done filmmaking wise. This is all pre CGI, everyone. So like obviously there's something going on in the cutting room, if you will, with the editing. It's so well done. Like it's so well done. Like there's the scene with Melody, who is of course the musician of the group, where her fingers and her hands have been cut off by the piano and the piano's eaten her. But then I think Fantasy and Prof are looking in and there's just her random digits are still playing on the piano. Like my husband and I were watching it, and I'm like, I can't tell if those are actual practical effects fingers or this is somehow two layers of film superimposed over each other to get this effect. So it's like it's remarkably well done for the 70s, right? But I think like without that style, this movie again doesn't work. So you need the style to both make the horror elements work, the creepiness, it's very tangible, the claustrophobia of some of the shots, like where they're just stuck in a room, the scene where Auntie goes through the refrigerator to get on the roof. Like, what? What? And Fantasy's watching, and everyone thinks Fantasy's nuts. But there's so many the ways in which it's shot too. Like, it's not shot through Fantasy's perspective, but so often our eye is being drawn to what she's seeing while everybody else is looking elsewhere. So, as far as filmmaking goes, I mean, like A plus. It's doing the job to drag us along through the horror and through the comedy. There are just these random side elements like the Watermelon Man, and then Mr. Togo and the Watermelon Man have this final showdown where Mr. Togo yells something about bananas, and then we're like, yeah, Mr. Togo's on his way. He's gonna save. I think at this point it's Prof and Fantasy floating around on just a tile in a pool of blood of all of the other young women who've been eaten. Spoiler alerts, by the way, everyone. Like spoiler alerts left and right. It's the movie's older than we are. Just go watch it and come back to this if you need to. When the not really mother-in-law but dad's girlfriend, she stops at the same watermelon stand and the watermelon guy is gone, but Mr. Togu has turned into bananas. And at that point, I threw my hands up and I said, I don't know what's happening anymore in this movie, but I'm enjoying every second of it. Mr. Togu never saves the day, so maybe this gets back to Brian, your question about gender. Like, is there something about horror with young women, specifically in Japan, that the men are not going to save them? Is this part of like a longer cultural history? I don't know. How does that work with Wooden Spirit? Man, that's a great question. When I'm reading Wooden Spirit, and I've taught this collection, Fragments of Horror, in the Eco Weird class that you and I co-developed for good old Penn State Altoona. The eyes in the wood, like if you've ever looked at lumber, which I mean, never mind. If you've ever looked at lumber, you'll notice like that sometimes there are these knots in the wood, right? So like when a tree is growing, sorry, we're gonna have a nature lesson, branches come off of the tree. And when you mill and plane lumber, the sort of almost like phantom limb remnants of those branches show up in the forms of knots in the wood. So your question, Brian, about is there an ecological element to the horror here, I think is right. Like I think there's something about this house that it's drawing our attention to all of the eyes in the wood that speaks to potentially harvested trees, that speaks to something about a past that's no longer accessible, and maybe all of the people who have been in that house, that's their eyes too. Like there's so many ways to read this really short, again, fragment. Like Junji Ito calls them fragments of horror. It's a very you start and it ends, and you're not really any closer to understanding what happened there. But both of these place women in these positions where they are seeing things in the house that other people are not. And the men in both are relatively useless. I don't want to be too harsh on the dad slash caretaker in Wooden Spirit, but he seems just she's pretty. Like that's essentially like what his take is. Oh, she's pretty. And that's how she gets in the house and everything.
And she'll feed us, right? She'll take care of us. She does the laundry. She makes the food.
Right. And like that same line is used in Hausu. Gorgeous's dad says to her, and she's a surprisingly good cook, about the future stepmom or whatever she is, like the girlfriend on the trip. Also, I mean, man, the putting on the weird fake green in their body fantasy commercial patio balcony, whatever that is. And Jens, if you've never seen the body fantasies commercial that used to play before movies way back in the old days of the 90s and the early 2000s, just find it on YouTube. Those commercials are wild. It's like a dollar store version of herbal essences or whatever that shampoo is called. So, Brian, I guess I'm going to turn it back to you. I want to delve a little deeper with this question of gender in both of these haunted house stories and how you see it working, and maybe if it's giving us a commentary.
I'm glad we're going to go there because that's actually where I wanted to go. So thank you for the question. Well set up. I think something that you've just pointed out, right, is that both stories, both Wooden Spirit and Hausu, there's a older woman who's coming into the family as an almost a resource of femininity. Oh, they cook and they clean. Let's bring them in. They will add something to our lives. She's going to be your new mom. I think in Hausu specifically, we get a confrontation with at least two generations of women. So again, I am pulling largely from Erin Nunoda's Breaking the Mirror, Hausu and Bad Love Objects. I think this is a really interesting, really good article that goes through a lot of this stuff. So we'll link to it in the show notes if you want to read it. But what Nunoda points out, and I have another article that does the same thing. It's actually a video essay called Hausu of the Rising Sun, Death of the Girl, is that there's a confrontation with an older generation of women specifically and a younger generation of women. So the auntie we see in the flashback, this kind of strange, almost MTV Nirvana music video of the auntie's life. Tragic story. Fiance goes off to fight in the war, World War II, never comes back. And auntie is waiting. She's just waiting for him to come home. And she says, I'll wait here. And at one point, there's even this like, oh, she waited so long that her body's still here, but she's actually been dead a long time. Here, auntie represents a almost empty person. She is nothing but a wife. And so again, we get these two characters, the stepmom and the woman that comes to the door in Wooden Spirits, as filling in. They're just women. They're pretty. They make food. They do the laundry. They fill this domestic role. And we're confronted with that. And in Hausu, we've got these 7 young women, and they are just giggly. They're like the Coca-Cola generation of Japan. Like you said, it's 30 years after the war. And what are we getting but hyperconsumption in Japan at the time? And so these women are, in many ways, this kind of flighty, very kind of almost surface level, but also very free women who are just out there having fun. Fantasy is kind of in love with their teacher or whatever because he's so manly, etc. So again, this is a spoiler, folks. Watch the movie. It's a cult classic. It's incredible. But one thing that we understand later in the film is that the auntie is actually consuming the kind of liveliness of the young women and kind of trying to become something different, right? To revitalize herself. And so again, we've got the 1977 girl and we've got the World War II shattered generation, and they are here confronting each other. And I think there's something there. I think the Mr. Togo who's on his way, he turns into bananas. Is that a phallic symbol? It's a little bit unclear, right? We've got wood and we've got bananas. Are these just wiener stories? I don't know. But I think Mr. Togo is like, oh, he's on his way to help, but he never gets there. It's just a bit of madness. And he falls apart into a pile of bananas. And I think that there's no saving the girls by an outside masculine force. And so there's something else that gets thrown in here. I'm just throwing stuff out here, meandering through this. But there are these paradoxes at play in Hausu where both the cuteness and the scariness are at play. Like you're saying, like Melody goes to play the piano and she gets literally eaten by the piano. And yeah, like you said, her fingers are playing and they're playing the music. And it's like this weird, like cute, also just wild scene where we are confronted by both violence and cuteness at the same time. When Kung Fu dies, she's the one, right? She's going to save them. Flying kicks and karate chops, etc., right? It's just like this weird caricature. She dies, but her leg continues to do the kicking. Her disembodied leg is kicking and kicking and kicking and kicking. Okay, the other paradox here is that Japan, post-World War II, definitely had this sense of we are global victims. The bombs were dropped on us. And there's something true about that. But there's also an amnesia about their own violence that they pursued in the name of their own culture against China, Korea, lots of different places. World War II, the United States, maybe. All that to say is that there's this paradox at play. Okay, I'm going to say one more thing. I'm going to throw it back to you. I want to hear your thoughts about this. Okay, I'm sure my brain's short-circuiting because maybe there's two things. Okay, the two things I'm going to combine here are, number one, this breaking the mirror Hausu and bad love objects is doing two things. One, it's saying, hey, Hausu is usually treated as a quote-unquote bad object. It's not The Room, but it's like one of those movies that people watch late at night with their friends, maybe a little bit high, and they laugh and laugh and laugh. It's so bad it's good. On the other hand, critics, maybe academics like you and me, are trying to make it a good object. Oh, it's really about the cultural confrontation. Put those spectacles on. The cultural confrontation of, World War II and hyperconsumption, and it's telling us something about, right, the failure of the masculine hero, right? Okay, so we have those two things. And in the heart of that is an idea that maybe this is partly about the death of girlhood. So these girls are in school, they're having fun, they get off a bus and they're like, which way do we go? And they're like, I don't know, let's go this way. They travel through a forest, they finally get it to Auntie's house, they meet the watermelon guy, and he's like, head on up there. This is the country bumpkin in Cabin in the Woods, maybe? As they're confronting Auntie, they're also confronting the death of their childhood. Is it the case that they are headlong into adult womanhood, which is really the domestic space? They are now wife and mother. When in the childhood that they are enacting during most of the movie, there's also this kind of homoerotic relationships. They have to leave those close, intimate relationships and move to a heteronormative space of the house as an intimate space of domesticity. And so the house as haunting is a house that will continue to haunt them because it means that it's a loss of their childhood. It's a loss of their freedom and it's a requirement to stay as domestic placeholders. So in some way, they are the hunting. They are growing into the auntie. In fact, Gorgeous and the auntie merge together seemingly by the end, and it's unclear if we're dealing with Gorgeous or auntie. Okay, I'm gonna throw it back to you. Help me make sense of all the wild things I just threw out there. Please help.
So I wonder, I mean, I think it's implied heavily that Auntie is kind of a succubus, like that she's eating the girls, not really eating them necessarily, but like stealing their life energies. I think she almost says something really similar, like "You all have made me young again" when she's dancing, and this is again the scene, listeners, where she just like does a teleportation thing through the refrigerator up to the top of the roof, as one does. Um,
Well, Mac goes to get the watermelon and becomes the watermelon, and I think
yep.
it's implied that they're literally eating Mac. She's got eyeballs in her mouth and everything.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. I wonder if like to what you were saying before you asked your question about how like this is about young women going into adulthood and how they have to leave like the childish things behind. I wonder if that's why Mac dies first, because Mac seems to be the least like mature of the bunch because all that she can think of is eating and being hungry, and that's I think coded very childlike throughout the movie, where everyone sort of treats her like she's just like this little fat baby who eats everything. And again, listener, she's not particularly fat, so it's a very strange body image type thing. But then like the watermelon is the first thing she thinks about and wants to go for. She wants to put the watermelon in the refrigerator, but she's not allowed to put the watermelon in the refrigerator, so it has to go in the well instead. And there's the scene with Gorgeous too, where she's in the bathtub and like there's this hair that's starting to like wrap around her. So I was having flashbacks to Ringu, which is in the US released as The Ring. So I think there is something to be said here about this house is reminding them that they have to grow up and take on these domestic roles. And maybe this is why um, Gorgeous somehow survives because there's one exception to a woman taking on domestic roles, and maybe it's being a beautiful woman. Because when she is merged, like you're saying, with Auntie, it's not exactly geisha, but it's coding very similarly to geisha. So like the idea that she's so beautiful that she gets to be exempt from these roles. But the rest of you, I mean, is it Sweetie? Sweet, what's the name of the one who's doing all the housework?
Sweet. Yeah,
Sweet.
she's sweet.
Sweet is scrubbing the floors. She's going to find the mattresses. The mattresses are beating her in an epic pillow fight to death. There's the weird doll. We haven't talked about the strange doll they find. This it's this blonde hair, blue eyes, American doll. Maybe there's something there that's being held up about standards of beauty, particularly in a post-war Japan. And if that's the one model we're getting, the other is that flashback that you're mentioning with Auntie, and maybe that's why it's coding more geisha. I'm like I mean I don't know if there's like answers here. I think we're doing what is the best part of academia is where we're speculating. We're speculating, and I think you could read this in so many different ways. But my argument to answer your question, I think, is that yeah, like this is making them grow up, and this is why Mac has to go first. I don't think that is consistent throughout. Like I think that some of the other folks who end up getting destroyed throughout, I don't think that necessarily is giving us their order of operations as far as like who's useful and who's not useful, because Proth makes to the end, and one would think in a patriarchal society, the smart girl would not be very useful, and they would be getting rid of her sooner. And Kung Fu, I mean, man, Kung Fu, she's great. She's just doing all sorts of Bruce Lee type moves, and she gets her own theme music, which is fantastic. And like you're saying, the leg destroys the creepy ass cat painting that is like doing like the it smile at one point, like clownish lips and big sharp teeth showing like maybe its demonic side. And just by the by, I think it's in most Asian cultures, right? White cats are the equivalent of black cats in Western culture. So this makes sense that Blanche would be the sort of doorway for this type thing. I'll think considered kind of a cute cat. Kind of looks like the Fancy Feast cat for listeners that are familiar with the Fancy Feast commercial. But evil, evil, evil. It can open and close doors. Bad news. The little like green shimmering, which is a lovely tell that you like for viewing it. Like I love that element of the film where it makes it clear that something is going to happen because the cat's eyes have flickered green. I want to go back to Mac for 1 second because there's something early in the film where it's pretty clear that Mr. Toko is kind of a Don Quixote like trope because like they're going the girls have this whole like he's going to be your knight in shining armor, and the knight that she has is actually Don Quixote, which if you're unfamiliar listeners with Don Quixote, I mean arguably the most famous novel ever written. It's a Spanish novel about a guy that wants to be a knight, but he's really bad at it. And there's all sorts. It's a hugely long novel, and he has this little companion, Sancho Panza. But Mr. Togo, there's a scene like where he falls down the steps, and then his butt gets stuck in a bucket. And they used all of this like stop motion animation to have him like running around and almost get run over by a car. And then there's a kid playing the drums on the bucket that is attached to his butt. There's a callback to that when I think is it Fantasy who finds Mac, pulls Mac's head out of the well, and then Mac starts biting Fantasy's butt. So again, like you get that homoeroticism maybe that you're talking about. But I think also like it's just there are these comedic things where it's like it's showing you that this guy's not actually going to come and help you, but also there's just like this consumption element again. Like not only are they going to eat Mac later on with a watermelon thing where Auntie has the eyeball popping out of her mouth, which is really creepy and great at the same time, but also Mac is eating them because Mac is now a part of the house, and I think it's showing us like what's happening here. And maybe this is where I'll pass it back to you. I don't know if there's any commentary here on past and present or old and young. I mean, listeners, Epstein Island was not even a concept of a plan, to paraphrase a very brilliant man we might all know, when House was made in 1977. But this idea of like the rich, wealthy elite or the olds eating the youngs to maintain power is as old as humanity itself. So is that what's happening here? Like, are we maligning old women as witches and crones? Are we just looking at a move to try to reclaim the past when the present seems to be so rudderless? Like, I'm not really sure what's happening here with if there's any cultural commentary going on, Brian, but I'm curious if you think there might be any cultural commentary going on here.
I think this is actually a good place to bring back Wooden Spirit because I think part of what is happening in Wooden Spirit at least is a fetishization of the past. So sure, we've got the wood and maybe we've got an eco horror element. Like you're saying, you can take a story and you can read it so many different ways. And I think one way that we could read Wooden Spirit is that this is a fetishization of the cultural heritage, and one wants to consume that cultural heritage. And it makes me think of a couple of things. Number one, the young girls in Hausu seem to be taken up by the consumptive culture that seems to be ported in from the West, probably via the United States. So it could be the case that the United States is not only a haunted house, but is not even satisfied with haunting our own house. We've now haunted Japan at this point through the bomb, but also through our consumptive culture. So the girls are consuming each other. Maybe this is a lead to or a nod to homoerotic relationships between the women. They're eating each other, etc. But there's also a sense in which, I don't know, growing up, there's always this group of people from the West that fetishizes Japan and Korea and China too. Lots of Asian cultures. But I think that it ends up being the case that the culture that is very robust, very rich, is now come to be some consumable thing. And so whether or not that's actually supposed to be the point of the movie or the short story by Junji Ito, I think we are confronted here with the desire to consume other cultures, especially a culture like Japan. And maybe Japan has lent itself to that, right? And so there's a seduction of culture and heritage and a fetishization of culture and heritage that I think happens in both, but maybe most importantly in Wooden Spirit by Junji Ito, right? So as a haunted house, is this about consuming one's own culture, consuming another's culture, or just being consumed by a consumptive culture, which I think kind of happens in Hausu. I don't know if that answers your question. If there's more kind of cultural baggage that's kind of not, we don't have, I think, the background for that. I'm pulling from a few sources that I found, but honestly, my own understanding of Japanese culture runs through my family, which lived in California and Hawaii for generations, right? So, all that to say is, yeah, I think we're kind of rolling with at least acknowledging a limited understanding of that cultural heritage and that history there. I do want to point out a couple of things just to maybe add to and complicate your argument about why Mac dies early. She's clearly ruled by the passions of the body more than any other. And so it could be the case that this is an immature kind of self where a child, a baby knows only the passions of their body. I am hungry, I am cold, I am tired, etc. And so maybe Mac is the youngest one of those. She's literally named after the stomach, which is where Aristotle, again, we're mixing East and West here, puts the passions, right? And that's what needs to be under the guidance of reason. Now, here, the guidance of reason could be a patriarchal ruler, could be the man of the house, or whatever it might be. But in any case, adds to, I think, your argument. What complicates it is that Kung Fu is also using her body, but she's not driven by the passions of her body. It might be the case that Kung Fu has put her passions under the guidance of some other logic, namely the logic of martial arts. That she's like, oh, I'm actually going to train my body for the sake of doing these things. So Prof maybe is the most reasonable. Again, I'm just porting in this kind of Aristotelian Western ideas and philosophy into what might be the kind of types that we're seeing in the girls. But as you're saying, like we get kind of progressively later and later. I think what's interesting is that fantasy is one of the last people to go. And in fact, we never actually see fantasy die. I think we see all of the other people die. We never see fantasy die. And we are left with this strange image of the two women. Once again, we have the stepmother or projected stepmother of Gorgeous coming in. And the very end, they like hold hands. What's going on there? It's a bit weird. But yeah, I think I don't know why fantasy is the last one to go, other than that she has a relationship with Gorgeous. And maybe the fantasy and the Gorgeous, right? Those two types now are combined and live in a house as the archetype of a woman in like domestic space, right? She is the gorgeous fantasy. She's beautiful and does the dishes and cleans the laundry and makes the food, etc. Last thing that I wanted to point out is that Blanche is very white. As a cat, like you're saying, right? There's tradition there. And it just makes me wonder, right, why it is that Blanche is so white. And this is again probably a very poor reading of this very fun movie. But it made me think of this guy that I read named Tanizaki Junichiro. He's a novelist, but I read a book by him in Praise of Shadows, and he talks a lot about how, as a Japanese man living post war in relation to the West, in many ways he saw his quote unquote yellow skin as tainted from the pure white of the West. There's something kind of just a little bit tainted. And he goes on to like kind of justify it and say like, no, this is not we're not inferior, etc. But there's this hint of inferiority, and you just wonder if the cat is evil, right? The cat is a white evilness that is both seductive and evil at the same time, with their green eyes. And I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this. I don't know if there's anything there. So I'll throw it back to you. Maybe we can start to find joy and wrap up our conversation. If you have more to say about Wooden Spirit, let's go there. But if you want to have final thoughts, take us into joy. What do you think?
I'm gonna read the ending a little differently than you are. Like I don't know that necessarily them holding hands is somehow they're going to become combined, like fantasy slash gorgeous, and then the soon to be stepmother or like the stepmother in the making. She's also an unmarried woman. And so the house consumes unmarried women. So I wonder if this is like a very intentional revenge narrative where like this daughter is so upset that her mother is going to be replaced, that then at the end here like she's just going to also consume the unmarried woman, because now she has somehow become part of the house or has merged with Auntie, or maybe it is Auntie and like we just can't tell because like she's become so youthful and young now after eating what, five of the young women in the house there. I have some like really nebulous thoughts about trauma again, and trauma and horror, and how perhaps the reason this is a comedy horror movie is is a response to the trauma still of World War II, of a culture that's been bombed. So like fantasy being the character that survives is imagination. It's trying to like figure out a way to look away from the real horrors that surround us. And ironically, or maybe appropriately, she's also the one who sees the horrors of the film and no one else believes her. So perhaps there's something there. With Wood and Spirit, I'm with you, like looking at this as reading it as sort of like a cultural history. I do wonder if there's some elements of trauma there too. It's just weird. It's like frankly, like listeners, it's just weird. There's an article that I remember teaching when I taught this collection, but also that I pulled up thinking about this for today, that's talking about how Ito's style of manga is a type of cinematism. I'm not going to get into it, but just to, shout out the author. It's Ivan Dario Jaramillo Chavez from title is Beyond the Panel, Cinematism and Effective Responses in Ito Junji's Tomi. Tomi is not the same as Fragments of Horror, but Tomi is a character who shows up in Fragments of Horror time and again. At any rate, so there's, I think the argument in brief here is that manga, specifically the way in which Ito does manga, is very much a response to dread and a response to trauma. And I think that's what we're seeing in both these texts. Like I think we're seeing how do you deal with dread and trauma, and what does that look like then in the genre of horror. So I don't know if any of that made sense, Brian and listeners, so forgive me if it did not. But I think there's just maybe there's some more trauma to unpack with horror. Um, and again, we opened talking about how the horrors of Japan are not the same horrors as the United States, but no less traumatic, and in many ways more so traumatic, particularly with the atomic bomb. Maybe time to get into joy. If you don't mind, I'll start off. I think again, this movie is so much fun. It has that 70s sort of pastiche aesthetic about it. Like it's great. It's weird. There's all sorts of strangeness going on. It's enjoyable to watch, and it's relatively short. So like listener, if you haven't watched it, it's about 90 minutes. So like go and give it a watch. It I think will help make sense of what we're saying here. With Wooden Spirit, I think the way that Ito, throughout that collection, Fragments of Horror, uses eroticism to evoke horror it's provocative, but also I find a lot of joy in that. Like, because it's definitely not Western in the sense that, like, I mean, listen, Americans are prudes. Like, I think that's not an argument. That's objective fact. Americans are prudes compared to the rest of the world. And this one goes back to the Puritans. Speaking of trauma and terrible things, the Puritans, boo, hiss, boo, no more Puritans. Anyway, but so like the perspective we get with Wooden Spirit to us is extra horrific because sexualized woman and like making love to a house is strange, absolutely, but I don't think for the for Ito and for the even the characters in that story it's as strange as it is for Americans, because any woman who dares to show her sexuality or to have sexual agency is frowned upon in good old America. So I think it's joyful then to see that in the face of that. So Brian, I'm going to turn it back to you. What joy are you finding in Hausu and Wood Spirit?
I also love the kind of candy coated, almost commercial like aesthetic of Hausu. I'm invigorated by the idea that you can read something so kind of deep and heavy into what is often read as a wacky bad object or bad movie. I think there's a lot going on here. There's this, right? So the layers of this movie are intentional, they're intriguing, and they're just a ton of fun. You know, we've talked about the ways that the folks die in the movie. I am not one to take glee in the quote unquote kills, right? Which I know a lot of horror fans do. That's not me. But there's something so wacky and even caricature esque about the deaths in this movie that each one is both hilarious but also, I think, informative about what's going on, right? The disembodied limbs are continued to kick, the disembodied fingers are continuing to play the piano, etc., right? There's just something so wacky and great about all of this. And I think it's an exploration of the use of the art of cinema to tell a story, to give us a world. There's no time in this movie where you look and go, yeah, that's real. That's set on location. That's giving us the most authentic version of whatever part of the world they're in right now. It's not, right? Everything is this kind of strange, uncanny feeling to it. I love the play of the cute and the scary together. Like you're saying, this is, I think, another layer of the horror comedy. And you know, the saying that comedy is tragedy plus time. And I think that that's true both here of the comedy and the horror of past atrocities, past tragedies, and the confrontation with what's to go forward. So the kind of setup, the way that the kids are named in this movie, even the way that the auntie like crawls through the refrigerator, crawls up to the beam, and then looks directly at the camera and smiles at you, and you're just like, what am I watching? I don't know, but I love it. The soundtrack is incredible. It made me think a little bit of Suspiria. We've got a soundtrack by Go Diego. They're a fun Japanese like psychedelic prog rock band. Look them up. They've got lots of music, cool stuff. So absolutely love that. So yeah, there's so much here to say. I want to shout out the possibility of connecting this movie with The Back Rooms and House of Leaves, because the two articles that I looked at both point out that girlhood especially, but maybe childhood broadly, is a kind of time of liminality. You are passing through to some end. And the question I think that is raised both here and maybe even in Wooden Fragments, for the long timelines that we get from the trees to the house, the girls to adulthood, is whether or not we have a kind of teleological end. Teleology is the idea that we have a specific goal in mind. Is it the case that we're given a kind of disruption of our teleological ends here? The girls have to become housewives, mothers, etc. The tree has to become a house. Can we disrupt that? And like you said about fantasy, this is the possibility, the imagining, taking multiple things, combining them together for some future new thing. Is it the case that this gives us just an argument through cinema, through wild like interjections of different layers of film, etc., that we just need to rethink our world altogether? And I hope we do that in a way that produces a better world than this fucking AI-driven, awful timeline that we're in. So anyway, Jeff, I'll send it to you for final thoughts and take us out.
Yeah, I have no final thoughts other than to echo what you said, and just that listeners, you know damn well that Brian and I are not using AI because of the crazy things that we're saying. AI is much more boring than we are, let's be honest. So we hope that you have enjoyed our unexpected, unplanned, no expenses paid stop in Japan for Hausu and Ito's Wooden Spirit. We encourage you to go watch Hausu if you've not seen it. And if you have never read Ito, we encourage you to go do that as well. And finally, we remind you to seek joy even in horror.
This has been an episode of Horror Joy, produced in conjunction with Axis Mundi Media. Thanks for joining us. We want to hear from you. You can find us at Horror Joy Pod on Instagram or at Horror Joy Pod on YouTube. You can also email us at horrorjoypod@gmail.com, all one word. And you can, of course, find us wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a like, subscribe, leave a review. Until next time, remember, seek joy, even in horror.